interested in hearing thoughts, given what you just shared, and you're saying, what did it say? I'm curious to know from an array of perspectives, if you could talk about code language, because that's what I'm constantly hearing, and the notion of rhetoric, or the language, again, the language of persuasion, how we use specific words to say one thing when in fact we actually may mean something else, or how we use certain words to say one thing and everybody knows what you really, really mean, which is just one step from that thing. Remember when I said the word hate, and I was like, what are the words that are around hate? And so we call it something much lighter, right? So we don't want to say hate, because that's strong. So we'll say a synonym that feels kind of okay, right? And I'm trying to come up with what? Racism. You don't want to say racism, so you say words like, what?
Nationalism. That's one.
Bigot. You don't want to
Opinionated, discrimination,
conservative, liberal.
So there's these light terms, and then we have to sift through all of that to say, so what you're really saying is, right. So I'm just curious to know in terms of your thoughts of how we code ourselves as human beings. I'm thinking of that movie Liar Liar back in the day, Jim Carrey, where he was forced to, I don't know what happened to him, he was forced to, whenever he spoke, he was forced to say exactly what he, and I'm thinking to myself, if you were forced to say exactly what you thought, beyond what you really want to say, but it just comes spewing out, how many of you would still have friends and family?
But that's a good question to ask yourself one day.
Right. So that's not me being rhetorical. Like, what do you think?
Well, recently my name is David, by the way, for those who don't know. So recently I was talking to somebody who voted for Donald Trump, and I was just trying to pull out like why on earth he would have done this thing, you know. And he was talking to me about like small government, and Republicans are like famous for like championing small government and states' rights. And then I got to thinking, and I was like, well, what good has the state done? Because every progressive action has been taken pretty much by the federal government. So to me, states' rights is just code language for white supremacy. Yeah. It's used to, because if you leave things to the state, you know, that's just giving an opportunity for people of color to be discriminated against, because, you know, the federal government had to step in the South in terms of enforcing civil rights, in terms of making sure people vote. If you look at women's right to vote, that was done nationally. If you look at access to health care, that's a national issue. So
Roe versus Wade.
yeah, so anytime we talk about just leaving it up to the state, that's really a way of promoting this sort of white male agenda that allows people to be held back or held down. So it's ingrained. It's in the Constitution of the United States. You know, the issue of slavery it was left to the states. It's a state issue. So when you think about it, it's like really ingrained in this country's DNA. It's in our documents.
I also saw the, I want to call it videotape, but that's not the word they use on TV. The mother, I believe she's in Chicago, who found out that her 5-year-old son in kindergarten, you know, they had done a straw vote for the election. And she found out that he voted for Donald Trump. This was a African American mother. And so they videoed her telling this 5-year-old, how dare you vote for Donald Trump? What's wrong with you? Well, I tell you what, your bag is packed at the end of the hallway. Get your so-and-so out of here. Now, the question then became publicly, is this abuse?
The thing that bothers me about that is that she didn't actually sit down and talk to him about why he did that. To actually find out what her son has learned, what he was thinking. He's a human, even though he's 5. He has a brain, he has thoughts. He might have been doing it because other kids in the class did it, not a necessity for himself. Yeah. By the way, my name is Roland.
I found myself wondering, would they have covered it if the race had been different?
No, they wouldn't have. I can guarantee that. I have a friend, she found out her son voted for Trump. Well, she's very progressive, and she's a rape victim. Well, we all know about Trump's past, and his present, and his current case in sexual assault. He's going to trial for that one. And she was definitely hurt by her own son. Yeah. She was hurt by her own son's thing. Well, her son is also autistic, and she took the time to talk to him. And her friends. He's 9, I think. And she went, this might be partially just to protect himself. Because they live in a very, very red area. A very white area. Very supremacist, bigoted area. And he might have done it just because he felt safer doing it that way. But we need to pay attention to the language that we're having with our children too. And we need to actually take the time to sit down and talk to our children. Not talk to them or at them, but talk with them. Because part of the reason that we're here, and especially white society, is because we don't talk, we tell our children, especially white children. We indoctrinate them into this white supremacist society. I have to deal with that every day. I have to break down my own walls and tell myself not to be racist, because I've been taught to be racist, even in silent coded ways.
See, I'm curious to know if we're going to talk about the language of, I want to move past just even the word language of the hate and just go with language of actions. So I'm curious to know if you were to say that, right? You being identifying as white.
Yes.
So and then admitting and saying even the word about how I have to work on my own racism. How if there was a whole line of white people listening to you say that.
Yeah.
Let me give a scenario. Those who voted for Trump, those who who voted for Trump heard you, like what would that look like? Like what does that what happens in that dynamic? Because it's not on one end, it's not just the words.
Yes.
But there's something I'm arguing that it's not just the words that we're saying, but there's something that lies behind the words that we're just not admitting. So or that we don't want to completely reveal, or we are revealing it through our actions, right? And so it comes out in violence.
There's always going to be a physical thing whenever somebody's talking, especially if they're holding on to those especially white supremacist values.
What's that physical thing?
They will tense up. You'll always see it. They'll tense up, they'll start to get fidgety. You can tell that their mind is racing. You can see it in their eyes.
They become defensive.
Yes. It's kind of like a
smirk on their face.
Yes.
They come out with some of my best friends are colored.
Yes, that is a classic one. Or I have a sister-in-law or a brother-in-law or someone in the family who is black or Hispanic or so on. But they go into fight or flight mode. And that takes some work to figure out what fight or flight mode looks like. They become very defensive. Their thoughts are all over the place. They can never make a cohesive, connected thought once they go into that mode.
I did interject also that as an African American, one of the greatest declaration I had to make to myself was, I was a big white supremacist.
I'm sorry.
I'm a big white supremacist, okay? All right, and I had to acknowledge that because I grew up realization only when I did the African reclamation for myself and began to appreciate who I am. I had to consciously do that. So there are a lot of black people walking around, a lot of people, period. You can't grow up in America and not be impacted by white supremacy, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. I'm not letting white folk off the hook, but I'm just saying.
But it's
I have the issue, the sickness is a psychosis. You cannot be in a house with a mentally ill person. Excuse me, y'all. I gotta say it though, because it's mental illness, whether you want to acknowledge it or not.
All right.
You can't be in a house with a mentally ill person and not be impacted by that sickness. Yes.
And I think then one of those coded things that we say is you're not black enough.
Yes, colorism.
When we start
That is what
hearing,
that's called.
vernacular addiction that's too white, or attitudes that are too white, and I worked for an African American chancellor at the university, and he was criticized regularly for being not white, not black.
My daughter came home from Sunday school years ago, and almost in tears said, "Mommy, they said that I talk white." Oh, really? Well, honey, that's the language we speak in this family. And I tell you what, until they have a factory or a organization that you can work for and it signs your paycheck, then you can speak whatever language that is that they are speaking. But until then, we communicate this way in our family.
But on that can be put into coding also. That was direct by saying you talk white. But other ways are you talk so well, or so clearly, or so eloquently. And that's often put to people of color.
Yeah,
As-
smart.
Yes,
Now-
as if we are the epitome, the end-all, be-all of the best, when we're far from it.
I was running an employment and training program for the state of Michigan, which had, pat myself on the back, one of the best success rates. And I had to write a letter to our clients, tell them about a new policy. So I wrote the letter, but it had to go through my supervisor to be approved for typing. And she called me in and explained to me, "You're right, wow." And I think to myself, yes, I'm a graduate of Cass State High School and Wayne State University. What do you expect, But I'm sitting there looking at her thinking, and what is your point?
It's the intentions behind the words are.
Yes. What is your point? Well, we have found that the welfare clients' level of comprehension is the 5th grade. And so this letter is too well written. You'll have to rewrite it. So here is a chart. Where she got from? It tells you how many letters you can have per line and all. Yes.
That also broaches on to classism too.
Yeah, for sure.
The poorer you are, they also think the stupider you are. So you gotta dumb it down.
So I'm gonna jump in because I think we know these stories, right? Like I'm almost positive that everyone around this table can tell a story where they've witnessed it, they've observed it, they've been through it, and so in many ways I have a separate question, but I also wanted to ask some of the people voices we haven't necessarily heard, but to also speak to this coded language and how you deal with it, because honestly in the 30 minutes that we have, I also want to work towards that idea of how do we address it. It's easy to watch it, it's easy to acknowledge it when you're with your friends and your best friends and your family, and you're just like, you know what, did you see that mess, right? But how do you address it in the public so that it moves and it transitions from not just seeing it and saying, here we go again, to now we're actually creating change. And I particularly want to ask Delma to also speak to this because I've sit in your workshops, right? You've come to my classes. I've seen you in conferencing. where you work towards that transition, where you work towards that solution oriented in a way that sometimes scares people, and you're just like, let's go all in, right? So across the board, I would love to hear. Delma, I also wanted you to speak to that because I've seen you do you.
So just to make sure I'm clear, the question is how do we begin to, excuse me, I'm a little under the weather, and especially to you. How do we begin to, excavate coded language? Is that what we're looking at?
If you want to go there, go for it. So
I think what immediately comes to mind is trying to get. I think anytime you can successfully point to linguistic patterns, I think sometimes it's helpful. I think a lot of the language that we use today tends to have an etymology or roots in much more charged speech, whether we're talking misogyny, racism, homophobia, just across the board. I think there are certain phrases that have just become so normalized, right? So when I do my workshops, for instance, around homosexuality, one of the things I often remark on is the idea that I grew up using the phrase "that's gay" without any connection in my mind to sexuality. Because by then the phrase had become so normalized that I had no idea it was even connected to sexuality, right? And so I think a lot of languages like that. And so when I'm personally trying to point out what I perceive to be coded language, what I try to do is find its trajectory. So working backwards, right? For instance, there were so many similarities in Trump's campaigns. The phrasing he used showed up in Reagan's campaign, and it showed up in Nixon's campaign, and then what's the other guy? Not important. It showed up in a few different campaigns. And what tends to happen is that people tend to speak more candidly once something feels safe enough in the past.
Yes.
Then we can speak truthfully to it. So if I can bring in Nixon's work, Reagan's work, and show how a lot of academics tend to agree about what it meant now, looking back on it, then if I can say, okay, well, so we're seeing similar language now with a lot of Trump's rhetoric, it becomes harder to disassociate it from its legacy, right? And so I think part of addressing or unraveling or excavating coded speech, it typically doesn't form in a bubble. It typically comes from a legacy of similar speech, if not the exact same speech, being used every 20, 30 years over, just recycled. So being able to point that out makes it much harder to defend it, I think. And I'll stop there.
Well, Mike, I think that goes both ways. I think, the conservative who might track that backwards as well sees that as justification.
Yes.
So that he or she is going to use that to say, well, somebody was supported here and here. They've used it, so we're bringing that along. Where somebody else would say, that's flawed thinking that's been carried along. So I think that's one that can go both ways.
Sure.
That's part of the reason why it's so hard to break that bubble and that roll down, is because they will use that as justification. They'll go, well, it's been going on. It's like, well, yeah, but that doesn't mean it's right.
But people are candid now. Why are people so candid now? I mean, you turn on the news and you hear that violence has gone up ever since that President-elect Trump is now in office. So why does it seem, maybe they've always been candid, so why is it that it seems like it's out in the news or in the media or in people's faces more than before. And at that point, what may need to happen is you may need to ask me, well, what do you mean by before? Or what do you mean by more? Because it's always been there. So why does it seem so candid?
What do you mean by candid?
I'm using the
Are we-
terminology and the
Like
use of what Delma
Or
so-
opinionated or?
Well, Delma, when you said the word, when you started using the phrase, people are candid, maybe I should ask you in what reference or what was your focus or understanding of?
And I said people are candid.
Yeah, okay, now I need to go back to my notes. I thought I heard you say the word, well, maybe I'll just use my understanding and definition. That when I'm using the idea of people are pretty up front, they're speaking their minds, they're not holding back. So now you hear spray paintings taking place in one area of the Midwest, and all over the country people are now on the streets, and they're sharing exactly what's on their mind. It is a liar moment. I'm referring to the movie for that moment. But why does it seem to be so in people's face now?
The filter has been removed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's what we
term
do.
I've
Been
heard is,
emboldened by what's been going on.
term I've heard is normalized. That,
Yeah.
this Trump campaign has just brought it so much out that it's almost like, man, everybody sees it. It's okay.
So it's okay to say everything and anything.
In their views, yes.
Their view.
Well, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got elected.
And he did.
The alternative right, in an interview today, said, we are becoming normalized. That's exactly we finally have a place at the table and an ability to discuss our opinions in this country, to voice our, they have somebody in the West Wing now, so it is normalized, it's definitely the idea. They have their maybe they're gonna have their, never mind, be quiet, but their, I was gonna say their civil rights moment, they feel like somehow they are, that what they're doing has been disrespected or ignored or whatever, and they get their chance.
They've also been waiting for a very, very long time, decades upon decades, to have their moment in the sun again.
Yes.
The moment in the sun might be another civil war.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
greatly divided.
It is.
And to me, there's no point at this point in political correctness.
No.
I mean, Trump got away with not even completing sentences, let alone using any kind of vocabulary.
For me, fighting this, you can't cow people on the other side.
You gotta stop a bully immediately, not later.
Yes.
Exactly.
You
Stop.
can't think about how this might hurt their feelings, because the way they're thinking is going to take someone's life.
Right.
The way they are thinking, the way they,
The alt-right.
The alt-right,
conservatives.
yes. Those who push.
I understood, I just want to make sure I.
Oh, yes, that's
understand.
all right.
No,
Thank you
no,
for
I
asking
want to
to
make sure
clarify.
I'm clear in terms
Yeah.
of,
But they voted the president here, right?
right, that's why I said.
When you look at the
environmental.
numbers,
But I'm trying to understand, here's this little group saying they, and I'm like,
That's
Pardon me
fine.
for not.
but they voted, whatever we want to say, there were enough people in this
Yes.
country who
Yes.
have this point of view.
Yes.
That's amazing to me, like,
What that says is y'all really are a racist ass country.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
well, it
Yes.
does to some extent when you really look at the
to
stance
an
of it.
extent,
No.
that is reflecting this mentality.
But when you look at the votes, the stats on the votes, the vote between Hillary and Don were very close.
Yes.
43% of the registered voters did not vote.
I get that.
So,
But
so
you know,
that's
that
a
was
silent majority who thinks everything's gonna be taken care of.
Yes.
And probably, I'm gonna guess though, that's not a majority, who probably would have voted for Hillary. And so I guess what I'm saying to you is, you're right, he's been voted in. But I'm just not sure that that's a majority of people.
I see,
But
I can't
some-
say that.
Okay,
Yeah.
somebody else said,
I'm
and
sure.
there's something going around that I think is really interesting language as well. Trump's voters aren't racist, but they at least, but they voted for him, which is, says,
That gives them out.
But we're going on the assumption
no, I know, I
that.
forgot the thought, but the thought is really good because it's like, the people who voted for him basically said racism isn't a deal breaker.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
they,
Exactly.
that they voted for him,
They voted for him.
even though they claim they're not racist, but
The fact that he squeezed women's.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Just say it.
I mean, like, there are so many elements against this man. This is literally, this is literally informing by supposedly our standards, right?
Yes.
So it's
But
like
the question is
Did you have him
also,
as a preacher in your church?
the question is
he has
also,
a good.
did they vote for him because of racism? Maybe. Or because we want our jobs back from across the country, across the sea. And he has promised us more security.
So
And
Can
we're
I
gonna
tell
get
you-
rid of,
okay,
we're gonna get
yeah.
rid
We're
of,
moving away from the
I
language.
didn't even say it.
But that, I think that's a good point.
but we're gonna get rid of all of those, enemies, cause if necessary, we just bomb.
I know people who completely ignored the things that he did and has done and continues to do, just so they could get their jobs back, their economy back, and all of that.
That's not a just vote.
No, it's
So-
not.
It's not a just vote.
So if we